Good morning. Welcome everyone to the Q&A sessions with Meeta and Tosh. Tosh and I are smiling because we've had some technical challenges, haven't we?
Yeah, we were worrying about the wrong slide or the wrong section, and it was winding. Anyway, we're here now. We're here now. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Tosh. I have to say, using the word employee beef has definitely raised a few conversations in my team. They're like, why are you using that phrase beef? And it's interesting because it's such a... This topic is so two-sided, isn't it? And I think what we're trying to do is remember we're all on the same team, but it's not always that easy for people to feel that way when they don't feel supported or represented. So yeah, meaty topic coming up.
You know, I like what you did there. I saw what you did there. You know what? Handling difficult situations, being able to, I'll use the word embrace them, means you're going to have a skill set that can just handle all sorts of situations. Doesn't have to be court cases. It can be managing difficult conversations, simple things like that. You know, we're talking about grievances in this one, but, you know, we've got 3 types of scenarios officially that we want to talk about. And I think that possibly, you know, one of them is just practical approaches. And I think I'd like us to put both of our experiences down for everybody watching to see what they can, you know, how they feel from it. So should we go through the format and exactly what the topics are, and then we'll dive in?
Let's do it. And I've done an amazing poll as well, wanting to find out from everyone what the feel of their people was, but it hasn't happened. I might see if I can get a chance to put it up there, but just really wanted to know how your teams are feeling, how your workforce are feeling, because definitely this state of flux is back, isn't it, Tosh? And I think that's probably what's starting to cause employee beef as well, you know, for one better word. We're sticking to beef, right? We're not vegans, we're sticking to
stick to beef, yeah. You're right. And there's all sorts of different challenges at the moment, whether it's flexible working and people not wanting to come in, employers wanting to come in. I know we've talked about those things, but what we'll do is we'll talk about them as grievances, as complaints by employees, whatever they are. And then obviously the principles we want to give you all today, you should be able to apply in any of those things. Yeah. And if there's anything that you need that's more than what we're talking about, you know what I'm going to say, take it offline. Give us a call. You know, we'll happily answer your questions. But in the meantime, in this forum, there's a chat box on the right. Any questions, put them in there. We will answer every single one before the end of this 40-minute webinar.
And it's a really easy chat box. We get public hellos and we get public comments, and you can make it private if you don't want everyone to see what it is. And if I see it's private, I don't say a name. And you know, so it's good to get a feel for what your challenges are, because that's what the next 30 to 40 minutes are all about. We bring to life the reality of the systems and approaches, but ultimately you're going to take away what works for your organization and what works for you. So 30 to 40 minutes, chat box here. As Tosh said, if there's anything you need, link in with us as well. Tosh and I put a lot of content and opinion and expertise on there. So it's always a pleasure to help.
So today's topic is the 3 most effective ways to resolve employee beef in the workplace, save time, money, and hassle. And what we're going to be covering to this session is, first of all, the formal processes. You know, what do you need? You know, we've got here in the list that we sent out for everybody. You know, throw the book at it, make the system work for you. You know, how to handle a formal grievance effectively. So that's the formal legal way of doing things.
I don't agree with that one, but yes, it's there. And
I think you're more the second one, which was does the off the record conversation really work? You know, a non-contentious way to resolve employee complaints. And we've got 2 different ways we're going to be dealing with that as well. And obviously any questions, or maybe you've got specific situations you're dealing with right now, you're not sure what to do or say how to handle it, please put it in the chat and let us give you the answers right now, live.
Free employment law advice coming our way.
So let's get stuck in, right? It was resolving employee beef. First of all, before we move forward, we said there are 3 ways. And just before we went live, you said, well, this is what I think the third way is. I think there could be an alternative third way as well. So it'd be good to discuss third way alternatives and options. Let me just lay that out at the beginning so everybody knows what they're kind of in for. So it's either formal grievances, that's one way of dealing, formal grievance processes. Informal grievance processes is the second way, in my experience, of dealing with these things in the workplace. And the third way is through mediation.
Okay, which is also a kind of formal and yet less legal way, mediation, getting people around the table. I have an alternative, which is almost like an informal grievance, which is, why not set up almost like an ambassador for internal beef? rather than it going to line manager or HR, there may be somebody who is the cultural representative of the organization, and it can go to them and they can actually advise them. So it almost becomes like a peer group.
Yeah.
But again,
it also makes employees feel they can go to somebody to complain without it being a big deal or a big formal thing in writing, but we'll cover that.
It's almost like a mentor buddy kind of approach. So yeah, some different organizations, different ways for different organizations. But Tosh, are you getting a bit of feedback here?
I'm not. I can hear you fine.
I've moved myself back a bit. I'm probably a bit overexcited and talking too loud. There we go. I could just turn it down, really, couldn't I? Technology can allow me to actually just turn the volume down. Okay.
So let's get stuck in. So the formal grievances. So what kind of complaints, what kind of beef are we talking about? It could be absolutely anything that an employee is unhappy about at work. Give me some examples, Meeta.
So examples of things like a colleague has upset me the way they've spoken to me. I don't like the way my line manager handled this feedback that was given to me. I feel that I have been given an unfair appraisal. I didn't get the pay rise I wanted. God, Tosh, how long is a piece of string? Grievance can take on any shape, form, or size, right?
Exactly right. The most typical ones that end up in my world in the employment tribunals are bullying and harassment, constructive dismissal claims, discrimination on any of the characteristics, sex, race, religion, disability is a very common one, actually, inadvertently, pregnancy, whatever, all sorts of different things that could be just the way they're spoken to, as you say, tone of voice, which again comes down to bullying, intimidation, not being promoted, not being heard, maybe feeling isolated. All sorts of different anything that people feel that they will raise. It could be I don't have enough stationery, so as mediocre as that, and everything all the way up to discrimination, right, or unfair treatment. And
it's interesting when you use the word grievance, because as soon as I hear that word, I feel, oh my God, this is really serious. This is really going, all the way to taking up lots of HR and management time. But you're right. A grievance is just somebody bringing up something. Could be the smallest thing, could be the biggest thing. And actually, I think what this is about, and I've got this theory that any problem in an organization, any problem comes back to communication. When it comes to your people and your talent 360 management, it all comes back to communication. So this one, I think, is definitely all around how we communicate.
You're really right. One of the first things I say if it's employer or an employee is, I know the words that everybody's got used to using are the words like grievances. But if you look at it a slightly different way, why don't you look at it as a help me letter? They're normally saying, help me with this problem I've got. Not, maybe they don't communicate it that way. You've done this and you've done that. People have emotions. They don't necessarily know how to communicate, but you can. You can receive it differently and see it's more like a help me. I feel like I'm this. I'm being treated like this. Help me. It's not I'm complaining. It's I want you to help me with this problem. And when you look at it slightly differently, you handle it differently. So what you're saying is really right.
I love that, because I say in my company, we can say anything to each other, provided it's polite and it's professional. It's respectful, you're considering, and actually all communication is improved if we put ourselves in the shoes of the person giving us. So not what are they saying, but what is the message, right? Because sometimes the words don't necessarily reflect. I really like that. And I think it's a really good lesson for any manager or anyone receiving feedback, because it's a form of feedback. A grievance is that person's feedback on the situation, that it's not personal, that they are only going to come representing themselves. Yes, the bigger picture is there is a business and an organization that has their journey that needs to be supported. But you're right, if there was no guard and there was no defensiveness, people would feel like they're on the same page.
Yeah, if instead of somebody receiving a complaint and thinking it's all about them because that person is saying that, we should be asking, what's happened here? I mean, unless you've done something wrong, obviously, that's a different kettle of fish. Yeah. So the way, in terms of letting people know, if they don't already know, how to deal with a formal grievance, I'm going to do it backwards, Meeta. It will make sense when we go through it, okay? Why do we need to follow certain steps? So if I begin with the end in mind, then you already know backwards why we need to do what we need to do. So what are the kind of situations, the worst case scenarios that result from a complaint of bullying or discrimination or anything else of that sort of nature? Yeah. Worst case scenario, guess what? It ends up in tribunal.
Yeah.
So what happened? Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to give you a statistic to bring this into perspective. Workplace conflict costs employers £30 billion a year. That's from ACAS. 30 billion. Specifically from resignations, that's 12 billion. Or if we were looking at disciplinary dismissals, that's 11 billion. I mean, to think about the time, the cost, it's just when it can be dealt with in a better way. And in your world, the people that have taken the time to come here and say, you know what, I don't want to bring these costs, hassle, stress into my world. I want to find a better way of dealing with it. Well done, everyone, because it can be done, can't it, Tosh?
It's exactly those kind of stats, which is why we're doing it this way, that you'll see by the end of this, me talking through the process, if we nip it in the bud, if we know how to handle it in the beginning in a different way, it doesn't get to this end process.
Yeah.
And this is more and more, you know, the way we're seeing things with clients. It isn't about becoming entrenched in you're right and I'm wrong and, you know, looking at it from our own perspective. It's getting some middle ground and understanding what's going to make this work. Or if you can't make it work, understanding what you need to do then. So absolutely right. So I'm hoping everybody will walk away from this webinar knowing what to do, what to say, to nip it in the bud, right? So the end result is it ends up in an employment tribunal. What do you need in an employment tribunal to show a case? They need to be able to say evidence. Exactly right. So you need to have a paper trail, support what you said all the way through. So and that means on both sides. From an employee's point of view, they would need to show what the complaint was. What was it specifically being argued? That's, you know, it doesn't mean a complaint has to be written, but how do you prove it if something goes on later on? So you put it in writing. What else is it? The employer has to have the paper trail to show how they dealt with it. What was their thinking process in coming to whatever their decision was? So a tribunal can see whether they thought it was fair and reasonable, all that sort of stuff. So you need the paper trail, right?
Yeah.
Before it goes to tribunal. What goes before that? Well, before that, there are other situations before you lodge a claim in the tribunal, which is something called the ACAS early conciliation process.
Yeah.
And what that is the law requires employers and employees to go through that process before they go to court.
Is that the mediation element?
That is exactly what it is. So there's another opportunity before you go to court, if you embrace it in the right way, to try and resolve it between the employer and employee. A lot of times they don't, but you know, it's another forum, right?
Yeah, that is another forum. And actually another element of this forum is the impact that you have with a grievance process and how you deal with it with one individual. Everyone around you is watching. So not only is the time and cost of that particular employee's beef, but actually it's all the perception that presents itself from people from the outside looking in. And if this is really about controlling the narrative and presenting your organization in a way that you want to be known for, what do you want to be known for? Right?
Correct. Yes, exactly right. And the way you handle anything is the way you handle everything. That's what reputation is. And that's going to make a difference in terms of how people behave, you know, what they do, what's acceptable, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, people talk with their feet. And again, I'm all about retention and development of people, not just attraction, not just recruiting them in, but helping them stay. And we all know from exit interviews, the smallest thing can shift somebody's loyalty and commitment to an organization, something that could have been avoided.
Exactly right. So before the ACAS process, the employee would have resigned, presumably, because they've gone through this grievance process and it's not worked, so they're now going to court. And now let me reverse the timeline again and start from the beginning. So now we're just talking about the grievance process. So typically what happens is somebody will go to HR and they're unhappy about something. Let's make it up. Let's say I'm being bullied at work and I'll talk to them about it. HR would normally ask them to put it in writing.
Okay. So usually grievance could be an email saying, listen, there's something that's happened. I'd like to talk about it, right? Could go to HR, could go to line.
Say again?
Could go to a line manager, couldn't it? It doesn't necessarily go to...
You know what often happens, Meeta, the complaint's about the line manager. So then they go above that person. So, but you're right. You complain to somebody in the first instance or say, help me with this situation, try and resolve it internally. Yeah. Typically, the way to do it is to try and do something informally. We'll get into that when we're going past this grievance process. If that doesn't work, you go straight to a grievance process. So as an employer, you want the employee to set out in detail what their complaint is. And that means what happened, what was said, who said it, who witnessed it, where was it, what time of the day, how did it make you feel? As much detail as you can. Now, a lot of things won't be in that much detail. Maybe there'll be a paper trail of emails about certain things, or maybe the employee might even have a recording, perhaps, which would also be.
And as an employer or a member of the HR team receiving this information, the detail you've just listed about 10 things that person needs to put, and it's really important that the person with the grievance, the employee, understands that in order for us as an employer to support you and get a resolution to this grievance, this is the depth of information you need to provide in order for us to handle it properly. So the onus has to be on the employee to deliver that information for then the employer to take that and do stuff with it.
Exactly right. If they want to say, look, I don't want to name names because, I'm worried about this or that, you don't always have to, but just realize that it jeopardizes the position. For example, Meeta, let's say I'm raising a complaint of bullying against you.
Yeah.
Right? And I say, you know what, Meeta's been bullying me and all these different things have happened and so forth. And they say, okay, well, what about the witnesses? Well, I don't want to bring other people into it. Well, now what you need to understand is that the burden of proof for employers isn't like it is in the criminal courts, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. Most people know that from television or the bill or something. Remember that? That was years ago. But in employment law, the balance of probabilities is what the legal burden of proof is. Do you know what that means?
I do from sessions with you here, which is that it's not what happened, it's what it looks like that happened.
Yeah. On a balance of probabilities doesn't even mean what is the truth. It means looking at all the evidence that's available, reasonably available, what does the evidence suggest has happened? So, for example, let's say you and I, as I say, you say that we're doing a webinar at 11:20, which is what we're approaching now, and I say, no, forget that this is recording, obviously, and all the people are watching this, and I say, no, it was 11:20 at night. I'm a solicitor of the senior courts, and I never lie.
Yeah.
Now, you might think my credibility will be enough. You might think because the line manager is talking, maybe his evidence or her evidence is more preferable than the employee's.
Yeah.
But it's not. What is it? You have to look at all the evidence. Well, hang on a minute. Why was it 11:20 at night, Tosh?
Yeah.
What were you doing at that late night? Are your office open? Are they open at that sort of time? Are those your normal hours? Whatever it is I'm going to say is a lie.
So it's putting it into context as well.
Correct. Context is the word. Correct. Yeah. So whereas you will have a clear story on why it's 11:20 a.m. because it's the truth. Same thing happens with these situations and the evidence.
So if somebody comes to an employer and says, this is my problem, I don't want to name names, the employer can turn around and say, well, look, if you want me to resolve this, you will have a better chance of getting a satisfactory and positive outcome if you can give us more names. If you can't, then what would you like me to do about it? We can ask that, can't we?
Absolutely. The reality is if the employee doesn't bring all that evidence to the table, the employer just has to make a decision based on what's reasonably available.
Yeah. And I have to say, we're using bullying and harassment, there'll be so many complaints that are based on behaviors, based on based on bullying, things that misunderstandings. I think it's really important for employers to have their annual, here's our policy on equality and diversity, here's our policy on bullying and harassment, here's a workshop on communication and team engagement. I know it can seem a little bit intense, but actually, if you break it down into a 12-month point, you can go back to employees and say, but you've had that training. Why is this coming up? And it just shows that we're here to alleviate and overcome challenges and eliminate grievances rather than just deal with the fallout of bad communication.
I think this is going to be more relevant when we get onto the alternatives than to the formal process. And that absolutely is on all fours with what you're saying, which is about the mindset and how you approach these sorts of things.
Okay, because if we're still doing the formal right now, so
I've written a complaint. I've named names. I've said what's happened, when it's happened, how it happened, all that as much as I can. I've given you emails that support it. I've given you recordings. I've given you all my witnesses. Go and talk to them. Find out what's happened so that you can see my version of events is true. Then an investigating officer, whoever that is, will then go and check out all the evidence and speak to the relevant witnesses that have been named. Right? So they may decide themselves who to talk to.
A layperson would ask who could be allocated as an investigating officer.
Yes, so it's normally the HR person. What it shouldn't be is the same person that's chairing the meeting. And the reason is if you're investigating and you start looking at all the evidence and speaking to people, you start to formulate an opinion, don't you?
Yeah.
And then the way the law looks at it is that you're then more biased in terms of how the outcome's going to be. So it should be somebody else that deals with it. Look at it a bit like if it was the police or the Crown Prosecution Service, they produce the case, but the judge doesn't hear anything until the day to look at it. It's the same thing when we're looking at it at a grievance hearing.
It's bringing in objectivity and fairness at all stages.
As much as you can do. Obviously, it depends on the size and administrative resources of the organisation. If they don't have lots of people, they don't have lots of people.
But could they go to somebody like you? Like, would you ever give your client support to manage grievance processes from an external perspective? Does that work?
Yes, that happens a lot. Where we advise them, we generally won't run the disciplinaries because if a lawyer turns up, everybody's back goes up. But it's very common. You can get if you don't have something internal, you can appoint an external HR person. Show you're getting a professional in to deal with it properly.
Yeah.
At that grievance meeting, the employee's got the right to be accompanied by a fellow employee or trade union representative. Even if they're not a member of a union, you can still bring a trade union representative if available.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean their mother, their brother, or their mate, or a lawyer, in fact. And that person can't speak on their behalf. They can just make some representations, perhaps, but they can't answer questions on their behalf. They can normally are just there as a witness, okay?
What does it mean to make representation? Sorry, I want to be treated like
think a bit like this. So if I go to court for my client, and I'm representing the employee, I can make submissions from them. Well, judge, this is what's happening, so forth, right? But when it comes to asking questions, I don't answer the questions on the evidence necessarily. It's the witness. So the client goes into the witness box, and I can't answer the questions.
Yeah.
The client has to, or the employee has to answer the questions, or the employer, if they're my client, has to answer the questions.
Yeah.
So similarly in the grievance process, if we're asking the questions, the representative doesn't answer it. They might answer procedural issues or arguments, those sorts of things, but in fact, it's that person.
Okay, so I have a theory again, or from experience and from conversations with other organisations, people, business leaders. I think once a grievance has been raised, in the main, that relationship becomes damaged. In the main, is that fair? Is that a fair reflection?
It is a totally fair reflection, but that's because they don't look at it in the way that we're about to talk about when we get to the other two processes. This will change the way we're looking at it. The way I'm putting it right now is the strict letter of the law, ticking boxes to show you've gone through the right process, right?
Yeah, and I think my segue is that if an organisation can do everything not to get to that point, it is quids in on that 30 billion that it's costing right now.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And that, I say that's all more prep. Like grievance processes are execution. What we're talking about with alternatives is pre-prep, isn't it?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And I'm trying to have a grown-up conversation before emotions take over and people start exercising behaviors that they don't really want to have. So
an employer could say, well, listen, why don't we have an informal chat? Not even mention the grievance.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I'm going to finish off this bit about the formal process, and then we're going to go right back to the roots of it to talk about how we change the direction of it. So we have the hearing. The person chairing the meeting will look at all the evidence in the round, and then they don't have to make a decision there. They can go away and think about it. Or maybe there's further investigations or more witnesses that need to be spoken to. But then you look at all the evidence and we say, okay, what does it look like that's happened? Does it look like this person has bullied this person? Does it look like this person has discriminated or sexually harassed them or done whatever the complaint is? Does it look like that is? If the answer is no, then you obviously don't find in the employee's favor. A lot of the time, a lot of employees have real difficulty with that when they know that the truth is something else. They don't realize that the burden of proof is what it looks like, not necessarily what it is. I can understand that. And then they form a decision, and then the employee has the right of appeal, and you just repeat the whole process again, except it's a different person that would chair the appeal.
That's a really tough one, isn't it? Because I bet an employer, regardless of what the evidence says, they want to help that employee feel supported. So they could, as an example, to prevent the damage or would diminish the damages, to say the evidence doesn't lead to this outcome. However, as an employer, we want to ensure that even if there is, because there's no smoke without fire, we say, we will put some training in place for individuals and teams to help with some of these challenges that have come up.
That is not my experience, Meeta.
No, I'm not saying it is the experience, but could it help? Would it help?
It certainly would. It definitely would. But I think if you are that kind of person, you probably wouldn't get to the stage that we're talking about right now anyway. Yeah. Because what's happening here is this. I'm making a complaint against you as my employer. You now become entrenched that, right, I've got to protect myself, not resolve it. I need to protect myself because he's making them serious. If I accuse you of bullying, harassment, discrimination, and you don't feel that you have, how personal is that to your integrity? You become entrenched in your position. So you're not looking at those things. You're looking to put that person in their place and kind of put it back. That's a really common way that these things end up being dealt with, which is why it escalates. Exactly.
Which is why I'm saying it could be an external company, it could be HR, it could be management somewhere else, just an overarching revisiting of communications, bullying, harassment policies, how to communicate well as people and a collective team. Because I think people forget that they're on the same team when grievances come up. Totally
right. And this is why we're now going to talk about the other options, alternative to the formal approach. Because you see, the formal approach is, right, that's your argument. I don't agree. Here's the evidence. Right, that's it, done now. Now what happens? They just go back to work?
Yeah.
When they know that something else has happened? No, what do? They do an appeal. They do it again, they're still not satisfied because the truth hasn't been found as far as the employee is concerned. From the legal point of view of the employer, they've ticked all the boxes. If it goes to tribunal, what does the evidence suggest? That nothing has happened. It's not, but that's not what we're talking about here. No, we're talking about avoiding that and creating the right culture.
Yeah, because the cost, the time, the reputation, the hassle, the headspace, none of it is enhancing your organization and the strategic objectives of it.
Correct. So guess what? Here's the alternative. How about being a little bit more human about it? Try not to be so, if somebody raises a complaint, even if it's true, there's ways to minimize the risk, minimize the liability, overcome the way the situation has been dealt with. If somebody's been bullying, most people don't do it on purpose. We're generally inherently, I think, good people. We don't want to upset, but maybe there's a story behind it. Well, that person did that, so I did that. Well, there's different ways you can nip that in the bud. So let's talk about informal process. I appreciate the time we're looking at as well, and mediation, which I think I'm going to try and blend into one a little bit, just to give people the concepts of it in any event, right?
Yeah, and I think mediation is it's not informal, because I said to you, it's a formal mode of an informal approach, but ultimately people feel listened to. And actually, the power of saying, I'm sorry, not I'm sorry, it's my fault, but I'm sorry you felt this way, and I'm sorry that you've experienced it this way, goes a really long way. And actually,
massively.
It can dissipate all of that defensiveness where people start to breathe and think, okay, we are on the same thing, we can get to a resolution together.
We're talking about human nature now, Meeta. What do people want a lot of time? They want an acknowledgement of the way they have felt. Or, I get it. You know what, that was right, that was wrong. I can understand why you felt that way. They want some justification.
To even as a manager to say, I didn't intend it to be that way, and I'm sorry it came across that way. I'm going to work on this. What can we help you with to make sure this doesn't happen again?
So mediation
doesn't diminish power, does it? It doesn't.
It
doesn't diminish. Sometimes managers feel by saying, you know what, I want to work on that. Actually, I think it's really human to say, do you know what, I want to be the best, and I'm always learning, and that's what I would expect of all of us, to have that mindset.
Yes.
So let's push forward.
We were talking about this when we were doing redundancies. About employers not knowing how to communicate with their employees, and employees feeling like they were just being treated like fodder. And actually, both people were uncomfortable with it. They just don't know how to communicate in that situation. So, you described mediation as a formal, informal, and actually it is. So a proper mediation is with a mediator there. Informal is, let's try and do the mediation process without a mediator, if we can look at it that way. So if you look at what mediation is understanding what the mutual interest is between, let's just say it's two people. So let's put us two as the example again, right? What's the mutual interest in it? So I feel bullied, which is why I raised this complaint. You didn't feel like you bullied me. So what we're going to do, we're going to sit down and figure out what's the story here.
A bit like couple counselling.
Exactly like couples counselling. Understanding where the other person is coming from and understanding there is a mutual interest. With couples counselling, it tends to be, well, what about the kids? You both definitely have that interest, whatever's going on between you two. So what is our mutual interest? Having a nice place to work, actually wanting to do good for the company, actually feeling, some sense of fulfillment, and we're feeling held back, or promotion. There's some mutual thing we want to achieve. What's really common with them, so you get an external mediator, what often happens is they get one side, and one person gets a chance to talk, they talk to that person, see the story, and they go back and forth. And how long that process is however long it takes. It can be a couple of hours or a couple of days or a week or whatever.
But also that then does make people feel on two opposite sides. Whereas if it can be treated almost like, well, let's work together to resolve this in a way that we all want the best outcomes, then people feel like they're saving the marriage. And I'm using the analogy rather than hitting divorce court, right? That's the...
Yes, correct. What's really interesting about the process, Meeta, having done several of them, is that at the beginning, everybody's just entrenched. And it's a little bit like you've got to go there to get to there, to get to here. And then there's a bit, I didn't realize you felt that way. And then there's a break somewhere. Somebody bends a little, then the other one bends a little.
Do you know what?
Then you start to get to a solution.
There's a really good exercise that is applied in relate counselling that has also been applied in business. And it's the reflecting. So when someone says what they feel happened, the person on the other side says, what you feel happened is, and they repeat it back so they can show that they understand. Doesn't mean they agree. They're just reflecting. I think it's called mirror. I don't know what the phrase is, but it's a very clever way by saying what you felt is, and this is how it made you feel, and this is the outcome. they're literally repeating word for word, but it shows they've listened, it shows they're engaged. And actually that's when people start to give a little bit back. And that does take time, but my God, it will save more time and money and hassle than going all the way through a grievance process and formal,
grievance process.
Yes. No, I'm thinking about the court one. What do they call it? They call it
tribunals,
dismissal cases and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I was in a meeting this morning, Meeta, with the inspired CEOs who are going to be our guests next week. In fact, and we'll talk about it later on. Yeah. And one of the examples that that came up in there, and I love the analogy which fits with this, is it's not just about getting to the end point. If it was just about getting to the end point, then composers would just find what the final note is. It's all the notes between that lead up to the final note, the music that you enjoy that process, that before you get to the end, you need to go through that to really enjoy to get the proper benefit of that process. It's the same thing with mediation. You need to go through those change of emotions, feelings, understandings that, as you say, as I said earlier, slightly make you bend where your position is to get to an answer that really actually works.
Yeah. So practical tips for informal processes could be that you say, listen, why don't we go for coffee? Take it off site. Don't make it in the work environment where you're in somebody's office or at someone's desk or even in the boardroom. Why not say, well, look, let's go grab a drink and let me hear what you've got to say. Let me understand. I think that is a really good first step to resolving anything because it shows interest, it shows willing to listen, it shows understanding. If at that point it can't be resolved, then you can say, listen, let's get a third party in. Maybe we're not seeing something that's glaringly obvious there. Let's get someone in, and from that then. And I think by that person who's competent,
totally agree,
feeling listened to, feeling heard, actually just talking about it starts to dissipate the angst and anger and frustration and disappointment. All of those energies dissipate into, okay, maybe I didn't see something that was there as well. But
I totally agree.
Everyone work towards that better solution.
It depends on your skill set, Meet. If it was somebody like you, I'd totally say, yeah, do that. Talk to your two employees, figure it out. I use the word crack skulls, which isn't correct. We're going to put them together and figure it out. But you'll also know then if that doesn't work, then you'll go down the mediation option if that's appropriate. And again, you're just getting the employees back.
So here, the question was, can you actually have an off-the-record chat? Like, is there such a thing as an off-the-record chat? Because that, I think, is what a lot of managers and employers, because you're never off the record. If you're an employer, you're never off the clock. You're never off the record. Whether it's a weekend, an evening, a drink at a bar, after 10 drinks, you are representing your organization. So as much as you want to be informal, you've still got to remember everything you say, you could make it worse for yourself. So just, even though you're going for an informal chat, prepare. Remember the boundaries of a conversation. Remember you are still on the clock effectively, and make notes, whether it's formal or informal, make notes of the conversation, right? I think that's really important.
Correct. It's only off the record if they are what are called official without prejudice discussions, and those relate to settlement talks with lawyers involved and all those sorts of things, really. But yes, everything else is perfectly admissible if it gets to it. But the way I always say to clients is, look, we're not talking about discrimination or bullying or this, that, and the other. We're trying to figure out. We need to get comfortable with transparent, honest conversations, and I suppose you just need to balance what you believe the risks are and being really honest about the situation. But a lot of the times, it's just, as you say, sitting people down and just acknowledging where they're at, and you nip these things in the bud, and it creates a reputation for the company as well.
I once had two very senior members of my team be at loggerheads, and literally it would have unsettled the whole half of the business because of the area that they represented and worked in. And I took a lot of time to sit with them and do a bit of counselling, things I'd learned in my own sessions. And I think it's worth every manager remembering their management training tips on how to handle conflict, how to deal with resolution, how to bring language into a space where it's not used as a weapon, but actually it needs to be deciphered, and I think it pays off in leaps and bounds. And again, the perception of everyone else, that person, both people in that process will go and talk to their colleagues, they'll talk to the managers, will talk to the managers. Ultimately, the reputation of an organization is based on how the difficult times are handled. Like we said, everyone can be great in good times. How can an organization handle conflict and difficult conversations?
What did you see happen when they changed from their words being weapons to then it being resolved at the end, which I'm assuming it was.
Yeah, it was actually. And I think, I mean, as I said, I think, for every scar, there's for every sort of like wound, there's going to be a scar, but you enable people to have a small scar, not a deep gashing wound that can't be healed. What I saw was an ability for them both to see each other's sides, and actually a willingness to want to work it out because they felt listened and heard.
So if we were to break down the ingredients of that cake, I suppose it's the feeling of having a voice of being heard.
Yeah.
The feeling that the company or employer was looking to reach that outcome of being heard and really understand what's going on here. And because I was about to say a willingness to do it, but actually I've done mediations where they just felt they'd sit there, but they didn't think it was going to work. Oh, this won't work. It's rubbish. Mm-hmm. But then there's a shift in attitudes. And by the end of it, they just didn't see it the way the other person was seeing it before.
No, and also, usually there is a senior and junior relationship. So for an organisation to say, yes, that person is senior to you, but the importance of each of you to the business is equal. That, I think, is a really important statement for any employer or any representative of a process to say. We want you both to be equally supported. And even though you're the manager and you're the junior in this, you are both equally important. That in and of itself will help somebody think, oh, okay, I do matter. And I think that's so much of what is missed, is
totally
the human side. You and I have started talking about the human side of business. And actually, the more we can tap into engaging on a human level, which is, I think, what this pandemic has actually given everyone, is the chance to be personable. It will actually build that trust and confidence, and people will want to come with a resolution approach rather than conflict.
Totally right. I totally agree. I mean, and I'm hoping that people who now have walked away from here will walk away from this knowing that actually there's loads of different ways to just deal with something. And the main way to avoid costly, time-consuming, stressful cases through somebody like me, which we deal with day in, day out, I don't want you to. Nip it in the bud. And the way to do it is just to take a more balanced view on it. Talk to them, give them a forum to be heard.
Yeah, because then it comes to us here at the main group when we deal with the 360 and an employer comes along and says, I need to replace this role. And it costs 3 times the annual salary to take the time to define the impact on your people, to overcome the challenge of the people still in the organization, to not lose more people, to replace. The recruitment fee is a small element of the big impact on your organization by losing somebody that you didn't really want to lose. So that's why, for me, it's the full 360, and it's a ever connected circle that how you deal with all stages feeds into the rest. So really know that it is in your hands to get resolution and dispute conflict in your hands to control outcomes. We can never fix everything, but we can improve the percentages that go the right way.
Correct. And you can be seen to be doing your best in whatever it is. Just because you take this approach doesn't mean that if an employee's raised a beef that they're going to suddenly start, oh, look how nice they are now. Maybe it's just gone too far for them. But at least you are correcting it going forward. And also, from my point of view, you're making your case if it goes into the worst case scenario where you can still defeat the situation, in your interest.
Absolutely. And, ultimately that becomes part of your cultural framework. How does my organization deal with grievances and resolve misunderstandings? People feel empowered and engaged, and they will just fly for you. They will take your story, your strategy, your objectives, and they will get there even before you expected. So it's
great.
It's worth it.
We had a quiet room today, Meeta. Nobody had any questions. I wonder if they were distracted. Or in awe. I'm going to say in awe.
Hopefully. Well, hopefully everyone's listening and actually reflecting back on their own worlds and thinking, how can I, if I have got a challenge, what can I do to improve the odds? If I don't have a challenge, can I be prepared for when it does come up? And what I would say is, you haven't said anything in the room today, but everyone who's attended, we hope you can take something away you can apply. And if you have a specific scenario, Tosh and I are here to talk you through and give you our thoughts and advice.
Or if you've got a complaint, put it in writing.
Very funny.
Sorry, I couldn't help it.
No, I say let's go for a drink and chat about it. That was a long approach, everyone.
So for those that don't know, Meeta won't be. You're not coming next week, are you?
No, I'm not coming next week. I am doing mummy duties for my son. So, Tosh, you're handling the fort next week, aren't you?
Yeah. So I've got a group next week called the Inspired CEOs, and I thought that would be really useful for the group here. Even Meeta's been participating in this, in the past. And I just thought, look, there's different ways of thinking and different ways of support. For managers, owners, all those sorts of things. So I'll be bringing that team along next week to show you a different way of handling other sorts of situations, whether personally or professionally as well. So I'm hoping that will help everybody too.
Indeed. And thank you, everyone. Joelle and Karen, Inga, you've all given us your feedback and thoughts. So we know you guys are out there. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Great to support everyone. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.